It was July 21st, 2020, a quiet day in Calgary, but for 69-year-old Vita Smith, it would be the last day of her life. Vita wasn't just anyone. She was sharp, quick with numbers, and known in gambling circles for one thing: counting cards. Alongside her longtime friend and business partner Kevin Barton, better known by his alias Chris Lee, she'd spent years working casinos across the country, beating the odds and cashing in. But that world, full of high stakes and fast money, has a way of changing people, and what once was trust slowly became tension. That day, Vita and Lee met up for what was supposed to be a simple deal. She had gotten hold of a passport from her ex-husband, a lifeline for Lee, who had been banned from most casinos. The agreement was clear: $10,000 in exchange for the document. But when the time came, Vita didn't hand over a passport. She gave him a birth certificate instead, and then tried to walk away with the cash. Something snapped. Lee would later claim he only meant to stop her from leaving, that he grabbed her in the heat of the moment. But in his version, within seconds, she stopped breathing. No cry for help, no attempt to resuscitate. Just panic. Instead of calling 911, he made a chilling choice. He placed Vita's lifeless body in the back of his SUV and drove off. That was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Lee tried to erase what happened. He ditched Vita's car at a local business, stashed her belongings, and kept her body hidden in his vehicle. He even drove to Edmonton, trying to think through his next move. All the while, Vita's family waited, unaware that their mother, their friend, was already gone. When she didn't return home, a missing persons report was filed. The worry quickly turned to suspicion, and all signs pointed to Lee. Surveillance footage placed him with Vita on the day she vanished. Police watched him, tracked his movements. When they finally arrested him, what they found was damning. Inside his vehicle were Vita's phone, her wallet, her purse, and something else: 5 loaded firearms, ammunition, and signs that he had tried and failed to cover his tracks. Blood in the car, her DNA on handcuffs. A struggle had taken place inside that SUV. This wasn't a clean accident. This was chaos, fear, desperation. For nearly 3 years, Vita's remains were nowhere to be found. Her family searched. They hoped. They feared the worst. Then, in a grim turn, Lee led investigators to a remote rest stop along the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff National Park, a place travelers pass by without a second thought. Until now, the terrain was brutal, the weather unforgiving. It wasn't until 2023 that search teams finally uncovered what had been left behind: the remains of a woman discarded like an afterthought, just off a road surrounded by beauty and silence. For Vita's family, it was a moment of heartbreak and closure all at once. Her daughter, Netta Power, stood in court and described the betrayal, the pain of knowing that her mother had been treated like she meant nothing. Lee had been under pressure. Casinos were cracking down, the pandemic was cutting off income, and his own efforts to cheat the system had failed. He was spiraling, and in that one decision, that one moment of violence and cover-up, he sealed Vita's fate and his own. In 2023, he was convicted of manslaughter, a sentence, but not justice, not really. Nothing could undo the betrayal. Nothing could bring Vita back. Her story leaves behind a haunting question: how far can trust be stretched before it finally breaks? Would things have ended differently if Lee had just let her go? Or was the friendship already poisoned long before that day? It was June 5th, 1990. Niagara Falls was roaring like it always does, but that day, it was about to become the backdrop for one man's epic and slightly unhinged dream. Meet Jesse Sharp, a 28-year-old kayaking wizard from Ocoee, Tennessee. With over 10 years of hardcore river running under his belt, Jesse wasn't just some guy with a paddle and a wild idea. He was a seasoned pro who genuinely believed he could become the first person to kayak over Niagara Falls and walk away to tell the tale. Spoiler alert, things didn't go quite as planned. Now, Jesse didn't just wake up one morning and think, "Hey, I'll launch myself off a 167-foot waterfall today." Oh no, this was a well-researched, highly anticipated, dinner reservation-making mission. That's right, Jesse actually booked a table at a restaurant in Lewiston, New York, because that's how confident he was he'd survive and casually roll up for a post-fall feast. He even parked his car nearby, ready for his victory cruise. He chose a Red Dancer C1 canoe, technically a canoe, but people often mistake it for a kayak. Either way, it was his trusty steed for this aquatic stunt. Jesse had spent years studying the waterfall like it was the final boss in a video game. His plan, simple, in theory: paddle like mad toward the edge, go over at high speed, slice through the chaos below, and coast 4 miles downriver to glory. There was just one minor issue: safety gear. Jesse wasn't into it. No helmet, because hey, gotta let the cameras catch that winning smile. No life jacket, because he thought it'd mess with his quick escape if the boat flipped. Safety schmaffity. A few of his friends tagged along to document the plunge, though oddly, no footage has ever surfaced. As Jesse approached the infamous Horseshoe Falls, some workers at a hydroelectric station spotted him and frantically tried to cut the water flow, hoping to stop him, but Jesse was locked in. As he reached the edge, paddle raised like a gladiator, he disappeared into the spray at 1:45 p.m. Silence followed. Then, the watching crowd started searching the churning river below. Within minutes, Jesse's paddle bobbed to the surface. Then, his red kayak showed up, with just a small dent. But Jesse? Nowhere. The river kept its secret. Rescue teams sprang into action, but the area below the falls was a watery nightmare. Raging currents, unpredictable whirlpools, and zero visibility. Divers couldn't even try. Days turned into weeks. Jesse's body was never found. Some said it was pinned under the falls. Others guessed it drifted far downstream. Either way, he was gone. People reacted in all kinds of ways. Some hailed him as a daring adventurer who dared to test the impossible. Others thought he'd lost the plot completely. His friends remembered him as passionate, determined, and maybe a little obsessed. One buddy summed it up best: "In Whitewater, people say things are impossible until someone tries." Jesse became the 13th person to knowingly challenge Niagara's fury, but the first to do it in a kayak rather than a barrel or inflatable. Out of all the daredevils who faced the falls, 134 haven't lived to brag about it, including Jesse. His stunt led authorities to bump up the fines for such acts to a hefty $8,500. Experts later chimed in, kayaking over Niagara isn't just a gutsy challenge. It's practically a suicide mission unless you've got specialized gear and a miracle on your side. Jesse, unfortunately, had neither. Was it pure confidence, a hunger for greatness, or a bit of both? No one knows. And as for Jesse, he vanished into the mist, leaving behind a legend and a very empty dinner reservation. It was January 5th, 2024, in Tulare County, California. A group of 13 friends from Utah were buzzing with excitement as they set off on what was supposed to be an unforgettable canyoning adventure. Their destination, the Seven Teacups, a breathtaking series of cascading pools carved into smooth rock, hidden deep within the Sierra wilderness. It's the kind of place that looks like something out of a dream, but demands total respect. This wasn't just a scenic hike, it was a test of endurance, skill, and courage. Among the group were 3 close friends: Janine Skinner, 34, a passionate dietitian and health coach; David Bell, 48, a beloved community leader and co-founder of the Harrington Center for the Arts; and Pete, also 48, a seasoned outdoorsman with years of backcountry experience. These 3 shared a bond that ran deep, a shared love for nature, adventure, and peace. As the group worked their way through steep inclines, narrow ledges, and slick, unpredictable terrain, spirits remained high. Laughter echoed off the canyon walls. They were tired but exhilarated, almost at the finish line, and then they reached it. A small, inviting pool at the base of a 40-foot drop. The water looked calm, almost serene. After hours of trekking, it felt like a well-earned reward. Janine stepped forward, smiling, confident, fearless. She leaped into the pool, expecting a refreshing break from the intense climb. But what she didn't see, what no one could see, was the hidden danger below the surface, a powerful undercurrent, possibly created by a submerged log or sharp rocks, turned that peaceful-looking pool into a silent trap. Within seconds, the water pulled her under. She didn't come back up. The group froze just for a moment, but Pete didn't hesitate. He dove in without a second thought, fighting the same invisible force that had taken his friend. At one point, he surfaced, barely, reaching out for Janine. She was close, but not close enough. She couldn't grab his hand. Refusing to give up, Pete plunged back down, determined to save her. David watched from above, his heart pounding as Pete began to struggle. Without a moment's pause, he jumped in too. He managed to break free for a split second, but then he saw it. Pete losing consciousness. David made a final, desperate decision. He went under again. All three of them were gone within moments. Somehow, they managed to pull Janine, Pete, and David from the water within 7 minutes. On that canyon floor, surrounded by towering cliffs and the sound of rushing water, their friends began CPR. For over 20 agonizing minutes, they fought to bring them back. When emergency responders arrived, they delivered the news everyone had feared. Janine, Pete, David, all gone. Back in Utah, the loss hit like a wave. Friends, families, entire communities were left reeling. These weren't just names in a headline, they were people who gave their hearts to others. A Facebook group formed almost overnight. David, Janine, Pete, celebration of life and friendship. A digital space where loved ones poured in their memories, their grief, their love. David Bell was remembered as a man of purpose, a leader who had dedicated his life to uplifting others, through art, through charity, through simple acts of kindness. His sister, Valencia, spoke of his spiritual connection to nature, of how he found God in the wild places. Janine Skinner was the kind of person who lit up a room. Her friends remembered her laughter, her strength, her kind and gentle way of making everyone feel seen. She approached life with the same bravery she brought to that canyon. And Pete? Pete was a quiet hero, a man whose final moment said everything about who he was: selfless, bold, and unshakably loyal. His family called it exactly what it was, an act of pure bravery. GoFundMe campaigns were launched to help cover funeral costs. This wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a testament to the human spirit. It was April 18, 2024, deep in the silent wilderness of Banff National Park. Rob Copelo, 54 years old, was right at home here. For decades, he had devoted himself to these mountains, guiding, teaching, inspiring. He wasn't just known for his skill. Rob was a presence. That morning, Rob was leading a small group of backcountry skiers near Christian Peak, close to the Alberta-British Columbia border. The terrain was both stunning and treacherous. Rob knew this. He always did. He was meticulous, methodical, the kind of guide who double-checked everything, not out of fear, but out of deep respect for the mountains. Every route was chosen with care. That day, like so many before, he scouted the terrain with quiet focus, reading the land like a map only he could see. But the mountain had other plans. Without warning, the ground beneath him gave way. 1 second he was there, standing steady, and the next, he was gone. A crevasse had opened beneath him, a jagged maw of ice, and Rob vanished into it. His team froze, horror spreading across their faces. Then instinct kicked in. They scrambled into action, shouting his name, trying to spot him through the blue depths below. They called for help immediately, sending a distress signal to Icefall Lodge, a remote outpost near the Lyle ice field. Time began stretching thin. Within hours, Parks Canada launched a rescue mission, dispatching a helicopter with 3 specialists. As the aircraft roared over the peaks, Rob's team, trembling and desperate, had managed to reach him. Somehow, they pulled his body from the crevasse. He was alive, but just barely. He had spent nearly an hour in the crushing cold. His injuries were catastrophic. The rescue crew worked frantically, wrapping him in thermal blankets, trying to warm his battered body and stabilize him enough for transport. From Lake Louise, a Stars Air ambulance lifted off, bound for Foothills Medical Center in Calgary, 2 hours away. Inside, Rob lay motionless, fighting a battle he couldn't win. He never woke up. The loss sent a tremor through the mountaineering world. Rob Copelo was more than a name. He was a legend. His company, Vetum Mountain Guides, had shaped a generation of climbers and skiers. He co-authored the Mountain Guide Manual, mentored hundreds, and became a voice of reason in a world where adventure always came with risk. But behind all of that, the training, the expertise, the gear, Rob was, above all, human, generous, funny, fearless in the way he lived and in the way he loved. Rob was a devoted husband to Rebecca Yarmouth and a father to 2 sons, Dominic and Luca. He'd spent years balancing high peaks with bedtime stories, ice axes with laughter at the dinner table. His death left a wound that words can't reach. Rebecca had once asked him, "Why go to places where the line between life and death is so thin, where you can be there one moment and gone the next?" His answer had always been the same. The mountains weren't about danger. They were where he felt alive. After the accident, the outpouring was immediate. A GoFundMe campaign to support his family was flooded with donations and messages from around the world. Climbers, students, friends, strangers, all wrote in gratitude for the lessons, the moments, the memories Rob had given them. Some thanked him for helping them conquer fear. Others simply said, "Thank you for making the mountain feel like home." Still, in the quiet aftermath, the questions lingered. What if he had stepped a few feet in another direction? What if the crack had opened a moment later? Or not at all? What if help had arrived just a little sooner? But the truth was, no amount of planning, no level of experience, could have prevented what happened that day. Even Rob knew that. Nature plays by its own rules. Let me tell you about a guy named Kirk Jones, a man who looked at Niagara Falls and said, "Yeah, I can take that." Not once, but twice. Yes, twice. Kirk was a thrill-seeking daredevil, or maybe just incredibly bold. Or bonkers, you decide. Back in 2003, at the age of 40, this Michigan man made international headlines by doing something that sounds like a bad idea, even in a dream. He became the first person to survive a trip over Niagara Falls with absolutely zero protective gear. No barrel, no helmet, not even floaties. Just him, gravity, and a whole lot of water. Now, let's pause here and consider the guts it takes to walk up to the edge of a 167-foot drop and think, "Welp, here goes nothing." Kirk was reportedly having a rough time in life, and some think the jump may have been a desperate cry for help, but somehow, miraculously, he lived. He plunged down the monstrous Horseshoe Falls and popped out with only minor injuries, which is like jumping into a blender and coming out with a paper cut. Naturally, the media went wild. Kirk did the talk show circuit, gave interviews, and soaked in a bit of unexpected celebrity. For a moment, he was Niagara famous, but fame doesn't come without a price. Since the stunt was, well, illegal, Kirk got slapped with a fine and earned himself a lifetime ban from Canada, which, let's be honest, is kind of impressive in a weird way. Fast forward to 2017. Kirk, now 53, hadn't quite shaken off his waterfall fascination. He cooked up a new plan, one he thought would turn him into a legit stuntman and maybe even land him a gig in showbiz. The idea? Ride an inflatable plastic ball, the kind used in zorbing, right over Niagara Falls. But wait, there's more. Joining him on this trip, his pet boa constrictor, Misty. Because nothing says great life decisions like dragging your snake into a death-defying plunge. So Kirk buys a giant inflatable ball online, climbs in with Misty, and floats off toward destiny or disaster. The concept seemed simple. The ball would absorb the shock of the fall and keep him safe. Never mind the difference between rolling gently downhill and getting launched off a roaring waterfall the size of a skyscraper. He was committed. On launch day in April, bystanders saw the ball bouncing through the Niagara River's frothy chaos. But then, plot twist, things went sideways. The rapids were too strong. The ball spun like crazy, and according to reports, Kirk may have even been flung out before the ball reached the edge. When authorities finally recovered the ball downstream, it was empty. Rescue crews sprang into action, hoping for a second miracle. But this time, luck had left the building. On June 2, 2017, the U.S. Coast Guard recovered Kirk's body 12 miles downstream. Misty the snake never found. Maybe she slithered away to start her own new life. Who knows? Kirk Jones, the man who once cheated death in the most dramatic way possible, was finally claimed by the force he had dared to challenge again. His first fall was the stuff of legends, a freakish miracle. But the second, a tragic attempt to recapture lightning in a bottle, with a snake and a plastic ball. The Dowlad Har Mountains were unforgiving that day. For Tom Howard, a 27-year-old British hiker, and his friend, the trek had been meant as an escape, a chance to immerse themselves in the raw beauty of the Himalayas, to challenge their limits against nature's untamed power. But what they hadn't known was that the path they had chosen in the winter was a deadly one. The risks were far too great, the terrain too unstable, and soon they would pay the ultimate price for their ignorance. On February 14th, they began their journey, trekking from Dharamkot toward Triund, a popular but perilous route when the mountains were cloaked in snow and ice. The ascent was difficult, yet exhilarating, with the world stretching out below them in an endless white expanse, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on the frozen ground. But it was the descent, where so many tragedies had occurred, that would change everything. Somewhere along the way, Tom lost his footing. Maybe it was the ice giving way beneath him, or maybe it was a misstep. Whatever it was, the fall was catastrophic. It wasn't a simple slip. It was a violent tumble that sent his body slamming into the rocks, the unforgiving ice crushing against him. His ribs shattered on impact, the agony of the injury magnified by the merciless cold gnawing at his exposed skin. His friend rushed to his side, but there was nothing he could do to ease the overwhelming pain, nothing to fight against the brutal power of nature. Realizing the urgency, his friend, despite his own injuries, left Tom behind, determined to reach help. He fought his way down the mountain, the altitude making each breath feel like a battle. But fear and desperation drove him forward. By the time he reached authorities, night had fallen, and the temperature had plunged even further, adding another layer of horror to the situation. A rescue team was assembled swiftly, firefighters, police, and the State Disaster Response Force. They knew the mountain well, and they knew that time was not on their side. The mountain was indifferent to their urgency, a cold and ruthless force that swallowed all in its path. They pushed forward as fast as they could, but the terrain was treacherous. When they finally reached Tom, he was barely hanging on, his condition critical, his survival uncertain. The descent was brutal. The rescuers placed him on a stretcher, but the icy ground made every step a grueling, agonizing struggle. It took them nearly 2 hours to cover just 100 meters, and with every passing minute, hope seemed to slip further away. Reinforcements were called in, additional teams pushing through the mountainous obstacles, desperately fighting to get him down to safety. Hours turned into an entire day. Yet, despite the tireless efforts of those working to save him, the mountain had already claimed its victim. Tom was finally brought to an ambulance more than 24 hours after his fall, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead at the hospital, his body ravaged by internal injuries. His liver was lacerated, his chest and abdomen crushed from the fall's devastating impact. The height from which he had fallen left no chance of survival. Back home in England, news of his death sent shockwaves through his family and friends. Tom had been far more than just an adventurer. He was brilliant, driven, a young man with a promising future ahead. A graduate of the prestigious Cranleigh School, Tom went on to study at Durham University, earning a master's degree in natural sciences. He had built a promising career at Quantexa, a leading financial security firm in London. Tom had his whole life ahead of him, but it was tragically cut short in the freezing vastness of the Himalayas. The Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office extended their support, but no words could undo the loss. The shock of losing him was unbearable for those who loved him. They struggled to make sense of it all. How a young man with so much potential, with so much life yet to live, could be taken by nature's unforgiving grip. The mountains, as breathtaking as they are, offer no mercy for mistakes. In winter, when the world turns to ice and the very air feels like needles against the skin, they become something else entirely, a silent predator, waiting for that one wrong step. Tom, unknowingly, had taken that step, and like so many before him, he wasn't able to escape its grasp. It was January 2nd, 2001, a crisp winter afternoon in Banff National Park. Frances Frost, a 30-year-old artist and dancer with a deep love for the outdoors, decided to venture out on a solo cross-country ski near Lake Minnewanka. She was just getting over a cold and craving fresh air, the kind of peace only nature could offer. The trail she chose, the Cascade Fire Road, was familiar territory. She had skied it many times before. Confident and free, she set off around noon, gliding through the quiet wilderness she adored. Frances wasn't just any visitor. She had grown up in Edmonton, danced with Ballet North, and later became a dancer in residence at the Banff Center. When she wasn't on stage, she was guiding tours in Kananaskis, always seeking that pulse of life in the wild. That day, she was simply doing what she loved, alone but not afraid. What she didn't know was that something else was moving silently through those same woods, something watching. Earlier that day, wildlife officials had received unsettling reports. A cougar had attacked a dog near a residential area. Another woman, walking her own dog near Middle Springs, had been followed by what was likely the same animal. It was bold, erratic, behavior not typical of a creature that usually avoids people. The signs were there. Something was off. As Frances neared the end of her ski just 300 meters from her car, the predator made its move. The cougar had been stalking her, patient and silent, until it saw its chance. It struck. What happened next was brutal and fast. Frances fought with everything she had, but she was alone, and the cougar, driven by hunger and something far more desperate than instinct, overpowered her. Later, a group of skiers stumbled upon the aftermath. The cougar had disappeared, but not for long. It returned to its prey just as Parks Canada wardens arrived, and this time they were ready. They acted quickly. The cougar was killed on the spot. Officials later confirmed it was the same animal involved in the earlier incidents. What made this even more chilling? This was the first, and still the only, fatal cougar attack in Alberta's history. That evening, back in Edmonton, Frances's parents saw a news headline: 30-year-old woman killed by cougar in Banff. Dread crept in. They tried calling her, hoping for a miracle. Then came the knock at the door. A police officer stood there with the words no parent ever wants to hear. Still, the questions wouldn't go away. Laura, a scientist with ties to wildlife experts, searched for answers. Why had this happened? Why Frances? That winter, food was scarce in the region. Parks Canada had been relocating elk to manage overpopulation, which may have disrupted the ecosystem. Some speculated that Frances's recent illness may have made her seem vulnerable. Predators in the wild have a way of sensing weakness. But even with all the theories, nothing fully explained what occurred. Cougars are solitary and cautious. They don't attack people, yet this one did. The randomness made it more terrifying. How could anyone have known? How close had others come that day? Frances's friends and family were left with a void no explanation could fill. Today, Banff remains vigilant. Cougar sightings still happen, but there are new systems in place, new awareness, more urgency. The wilderness hasn't changed. It's still beautiful, still powerful, but Frances Frost's story lingers in the cold mountain air, a haunting reminder of how quickly the wild can turn. On the 20th anniversary of her death in January 2021, Laura reflected quietly. What if Frances hadn't been alone that day? What if something had changed the outcome? There are no clear answers. Just the memory of a life lived passionately, and a silence in the snow where once there was laughter. It was July 5th, 1930, and in Buffalo, New York, George Stthakis was cooking up something way spicier than his usual chef specials. At 46 years old, this Greek immigrant had dreams that went far beyond the kitchen. He wasn't just chasing clout. George was on a mission to launch both himself and his philosophical writings into fame, literally. His plan, ride over Niagara Falls in a giant homemade barrel to get rich, get published, and maybe even unlock the secrets of the universe while he's at it. You know, normal weekend stuff. Now, George wasn't some random thrill-seeker. He was deep into mystical beliefs and thought this wild stunt would double as both a spiritual journey and a media magnet. He'd spent years writing about life, the cosmos, and probably the meaning of everything. But without cash or a publisher, his work was going nowhere. So, he figured, why not strap in, make history, and maybe score a book deal while he's at it? The idea of taking the plunge over Niagara Falls wasn't new. Daredevils had been testing their luck for decades. Some lived to brag about it, others not so much. But George was sure he had the secret formula. He designed a beast of a barrel, 10 feet long, over 5 feet wide, weighing nearly a ton, made of wood and steel, and packed with springs to soften the blow. Oh, and he had one single oxygen tank. One. Experts like Red Hill Sr., a Niagara rescue legend, warned him this was a disaster waiting to happen. But George, unbothered. He believed in fate and in his pet turtle. Yes, you read that right. George brought along his trusty turtle, Sonny, who was supposedly over 150 years old. George was convinced Sonny brought good luck, and who better to share a death-defying ride over a waterfall than a wise old reptile. At 2:30 p.m., a curious crowd gathered to watch the madness unfold. Tourists, journalists, and probably a few folks betting on the outcome all watched as George and Sonny's barrel was set adrift. It bobbed along the Niagara River, then whoosh, over the edge of Horseshoe Falls it went. The crowd gasped, the mist swallowed the barrel, and then, bam! It reappeared at the bottom, intact. The crowd roared, but the joy didn't last. The barrel wasn't drifting to safety. It was stuck, jammed behind the falls, pinned by powerful water and rocks. Inside, George was trapped in pitch blackness, deafened by the roar of the falls, oxygen running low. He'd told friends he had a 3-hour survival window. The barrel stayed stuck for 18. By the time rescuers got to it the next morning, it was too late. George had suffocated. His brave journey ended not with a splash, but with silence. Amazingly, Sonny the turtle survived the whole ordeal. Proof that maybe turtles really do have all the luck. As for the barrel, its very design, the thing meant to protect George, may have sealed his fate by being too big to escape the waterfall's grip. News of George's tragic attempt spread fast, even landing in the New York Times. People were torn. Some called him brave and visionary. Others called it foolishness, wrapped in steel and springs. Red Hill Sr. later retrieved the barrel and turned it into a tourist attraction. Today, it's part of a Niagara Falls exhibit, standing as a strange tribute to one man's wild dream. It was October 18, 2024, in the Tellico Plains, Tennessee, a peaceful area surrounded by dense forests and scenic roads. That day, a distressed 911 call disrupted the calm. A man identifying himself as Brandon Andrade claimed he had fallen off a cliff while being chased by a bear. Injured and partly submerged in water, he pleaded for immediate help. What initially seemed like a tragic accident would soon unravel into a complex case involving deception, a stolen identity, and a nationwide manhunt. Emergency crews rushed toward the Charles Hall Bridge, but when they arrived, there was no bear, no injured hiker clinging to life. Instead, they found a man's lifeless body lying cold and still. The ID in his pocket read, Brandon Christopher Andrade. Bear chase, fatal fall, tragic ending. But something didn't add up. The injuries didn't look like they came from a cliff fall or a wild animal. The pieces didn't fit. And the more investigators looked, the stranger the puzzle became. That man wasn't Brandon Andrade. The name, the ID, it was all stolen, a fake. The man they had found was actually Stephen Douglas Lloyd, a 34-year-old from Knoxville. He had grown up in foster care, eventually adopted into a loving home. But the scars of his early life never fully faded. Diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder, Stephen struggled to form bonds, to feel safe with others. He lived rough at times, on the street, off the grid, but he never lost touch with his adoptive family. But someone had found a way to manipulate that trust. Nicholas Wayne Hamlet, 45 years old, a man with a chilling past and a gift for deception. He was already on the run from Alabama for violating parole, and this wasn't his first time luring someone into the woods under false pretenses. Back in 2009, Hamlet had threatened another man at gunpoint deep in a wooded area. That victim survived. Stephen wouldn't be so lucky. This time, Hamlet's plan was colder, more calculated. He gained Stephen's trust, how, we may never know, and led him into the remote woods near the Cherahalla Skyway. There, far from any help, he struck. Blunt force trauma. No bear, no fall, just one man's life snuffed out by another's greed. Hamlet had killed Stephen Lloyd in order to assume his identity, hoping to disappear from law enforcement's radar. And then, he made the 911 call, posing as Brandon Andrada, a cruel performance meant to mislead, to buy time, to get away. And for a while it worked. By the time investigators realized what had happened, Hamlet was gone. The manhunt that followed stretched across the country. Tennessee, Montana, Alaska, Kentucky, North Carolina, Florida, he could have been anywhere, a ghost wearing stolen faces. The U.S. Marshals issued a wanted poster and put up a $50,000 reward. Still, Hamlet kept slipping away, vanishing just before anyone could close in. Then came Halloween night, a reported sighting in Chapin, South Carolina, his hometown. The trail went cold again, but finally, on November 10th, nearly 3 weeks after Stephen Lloyd's body was found, the breakthrough came. A hospital employee in Columbia, South Carolina, recognized a face from the wanted posters. Hamlet, using yet another alias, had checked in quietly. This time, there was no escape. Authorities moved in and arrested him without resistance. His fingerprints confirmed it. Nicholas Wayne Hamlet was finally in custody. Monroe County Sheriff Tommy Jones credited the community for stepping up, saying it was public awareness that ultimately brought a dangerous man to justice. But for Stephen Lloyd's family, the relief of an arrest can't erase the loss. Their son, a man trying to find his place in a world that often left him behind, was betrayed by someone who saw only an opportunity. This case is more than a manhunt or a twisted con. It's a warning, a haunting reminder that not all dangers in the wild come from nature. Sometimes, the real predator's wearing a friendly face. It was October 5th, 2022, in the unforgiving heights of the Canadian Rockies. That morning, 28-year-old Daniel Heritage from Adelaide, Australia, laced up his boots for what was supposed to be one last great climb before the season ended. By his side was Emma, his wife. Together, they'd spent months wandering through Canada's vast wilderness. They chose Mother's Day Buttress, a route they felt good about. They were experienced climbers, and that day, everything felt right. As they ascended the rock face, they chatted between pitches, Daniel's voice always carrying that familiar calm confidence. Emma would later remember how he had just tackled a particularly tough stretch, a steep, narrow crack along the fifth pitch. He'd shouted back to her with a mix of pride and surprise, laughing that it was harder than expected. Then, silence. She waited for the call, the simple word, safe, but it never came. A minute passed, then 5, then 10. Her heart started pounding. She called his name, once, then again, her voice rising with worry. Nothing. And then, without warning, the rope went slack. Emma froze. Her eyes followed the rope as it slipped past her. Then, in the distance, she saw movement, and suddenly, she understood. Daniel was falling. When she reached him, his body lay still. Emma collapsed beside him. She called for help. 90 minutes later, rescuers arrived and told her she had to go. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Later, investigators would try to make sense of it. Daniel hadn't placed more protection after the hardest part of the route. Maybe it was a loose rock, maybe just a misstep. The truth was, no one would ever know for sure. Emma replayed the moment again and again in her mind, grasping for a reason, a cause, something that would make it make sense. But mountains don't give answers, only silence. And then came another cruel blow. When she tried to bring Daniel home to Australia, she discovered their travel insurance didn't cover death from an accident. No funeral home would even accept him without a $122,000 deposit. The weight of grief grew heavier. Daniel's mother stepped in, paying what she could just to begin arrangements. But Emma still needed another $8,000 for his flight, and $115,000 more to bring him home with dignity. The financial burden was staggering. Desperate, Emma's twin sister Jessica started a fundraiser. Over $42,000 poured in, enough to bring him home. Still searching for closure, Emma returned weeks later to Cascade Mountain. She stood at the very spot where Daniel had fallen, expecting the tears to come, expecting grief to crush her again. Years have passed now, and Emma has found a way to live with the pain, to let the memory of Daniel guide her instead of haunt her. She doesn't dwell on the fall anymore, or the questions that will never have answers. She holds on to the laughter, the summit views, the quiet campfire moments, and the man who loved her through every step of their journey. In a tribute to Daniel, she once wrote that he had been her best friend, the love of her life, and her greatest adventure. And even though their time together was stolen too soon, one thing remains unshakable. Daniel will always be with her, in every climb, in every horizon, forever. July 9th, 1960 started off like a chill Saturday by the water. 7-year-old Roger Woodward, his 17-year-old sister Deanne, and their family friend James Honeycutt were just out for a boat ride on the Niagara River. Nothing wild, just a little scenic cruising near one of the most thunderous waterfalls on Earth. What could possibly go wrong? James, a 40-year-old contractor and part-time boating enthusiast, had invited the kids for a relaxing float in his 14-foot aluminum boat. He was no reckless daredevil. He double-checked that the kids had their life jackets on because their parents weren't playing around with safety. The weather was good, the water was calm, and the vibe was pure summertime bliss. But about a mile from Horseshoe Falls, things went from pleasant boat ride to, real quick. The motor conked out. Turns out a tiny propeller pin had broken. Just one of those small things that make a huge mess. James grabbed the oars and went full Olympic mode, rowing like his life depended on it. Spoiler, it did. Despite his best rowing skills, the Niagara current wasn't having it. The boat was being dragged toward the falls like a twig in a tornado. Realizing they were in deep trouble, James told the kids to hang tight and keep those life jackets on. Tragically, he didn't have one for himself, and there was no time to grab one. Then the boat slammed into a rock and flipped, tossing everyone into the rapids. Deanne clung to the overturned boat, her knuckles probably turning white as she fought to stay above water. A wave yanked her under, and when she surfaced, she was scarily close to the very edge of the falls at Terrapin Point. That's when John Hayes, a truck driver and part-time hero, spotted her flailing. He climbed over a guardrail like an action movie star, hooked one leg through the bars, and yelled for her to swim. Deanne gave it everything she had. On the third try, she grabbed his hand. Another guy, John Quattrochi, rushed in to help pull her to safety, just 15 feet from a 167-foot drop. Meanwhile, poor Roger and James were still being swept closer and closer to the edge. The river finally tore them apart, and both went over the falls. Little Roger, all 46 pounds of him in a life vest, plummeted 167 feet and survived. He didn't crash into the rocks, but landed in a pocket of deep water. The crew aboard the Maid of the Mist tour boat spotted him bobbing in the foamy chaos. Captain Clifford Key steered in, and after a few nerve-wracking attempts, they fished him out with a life ring. He was bruised, dazed, but alive, and only had minor injuries. Roger was whisked off to a hospital in Ontario, while Deanne was treated across the river in New York. Both kids recovered physically, though mentally. Yeah, probably not a boat fan for a while. Sadly, James Honeycutt didn't make it. He drowned in the rapids. His body was found 3 days later, about a quarter-mile downstream. But his quick thinking, insisting the kids wear life jackets, undoubtedly saved their lives. Roger became the first person known to survive an unplanned tumble over Niagara Falls without a barrel or stunt gear. Experts still call it the Niagara Miracle, and it's not hard to see why. It's a reminder that nature is powerful, unpredictable, and sometimes, just sometimes, it lets you walk away with a second chance. For over 2 decades, H Hotton was a devoted guardian of the Great Smoky Mountains, an avid hiker, an unwavering volunteer, and a woman whose deep love for the wilderness shaped her every action. She had spent more than 4,000 hours traversing these trails, educating visitors and ensuring the preservation of the land she cherished so much. But on what should have been just another routine overnight hike, something went terribly wrong. On Tuesday, January 28th, Anne set out into the wild, just as she had done countless times before. There were no signs of trouble, no ominous weather, nothing to indicate that this hike would be anything but another familiar journey. But when Anne didn't return the following day, a subtle unease began to settle in. At first, people assumed she was simply delayed, perhaps taking a little longer to savor the place she loved most. But as the days passed with no word, that hope turned into something darker. By Saturday, when Anne failed to show up for her volunteer shift, the worry became urgent. A full-scale search was launched, with multiple agencies racing against the clock to find her. Her vehicle was discovered at Smokemont Campground, an unsettling clue that she had indeed ventured into the wilderness, but never made it back. The search intensified, covering miles of rugged terrain, Bradley Fork, Chastain Creek, Hughes Ridge, until, nearly a week after her disappearance, the heartbreaking discovery was made. At 1:53 p.m. on Sunday, February 2nd, Anne's body was found just a quarter mile from the Enloe Creek Trail, so close to safety, yet so far from the warmth and security of home. Authorities have yet to determine the exact cause of her death, though foul play has been ruled out. But the mystery remains. What happened to this seasoned hiker, a woman who knew these mountains like the back of her hand, who had never once been daunted by the most challenging trails? Her death sent shockwaves through the community. Anne was an enduring and beloved member of our Smokies community, said Charles Sellers, acting superintendent of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. She was a dedicated volunteer and avid hiker who shared her passion for the park with many visitors. Our thoughts and condolences go out to her family and friends. The search effort had been immense, involving teams from Cherokee Fire and Rescue, Bucer, the Macon Volunteer Fire Department, the Keowee Volunteer Fire Department, the Appalachian Mountain Rescue Team, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, all working tirelessly to locate her. But in the end, the mountains claimed one of their own. Anne's dedication to the park was unparalleled. Since 2004, she had taken few, if any, breaks in her service. In 2022, her tireless efforts earned her a nomination for the prestigious George and Helen Hartzog Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service. Her tragic death raises more questions than answers. Was it a sudden medical emergency? A simple misstep on the trail? Or was there something more sinister lurking in the wilderness that day? Whatever happened in those final moments, one thing is certain. H Hotton's legacy will forever be woven into the very fabric of the Smoky Mountains she devoted her life to. It was January 10th, 2020, deep in the rugged silence of Banff National Park. That morning, Dr. Laura Kosakovski clipped into her skis with confidence and joy. The 34-year-old family doctor from Canmore was no stranger to the wild. Alongside her husband, Adam Campbell, and their close friend, Kevin Hiros, Laura set off into the backcountry for what was supposed to be another memorable day in the mountains. Laura had logged over 80 backcountry trips in just 3 years. Adam was a professional ski mountaineer. Kevin, a certified mountain guide with deep avalanche training. They'd planned this trip for months, carefully studying the terrain and weather. They knew the risks, and they thought they were ready. The snow had fallen heavily the week before. Temperatures hovered around negative 15 degrees Celsius. Avalanche conditions were manageable down low, but more treacherous up high. Still, the group pressed on. Equipped with beacons, shovels, probes, and years of experience, They moved through the landscape with cautious precision. They weren't reckless. They were prepared. By mid-morning, they had already completed several runs, each descent a dance through untouched powder. Spirits were high. They decided on one final line before calling it a day. Adam and Kevin dropped in first. Laura stayed back, preparing for her descent. She was just minutes behind them. Everything felt routine. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Adam stepped onto a ridge to get a better view. The mountain gave way beneath him. A massive slab avalanche broke loose without warning. Snow and ice exploded down the slope like a freight train. He screamed Laura's name, trying to warn her, but she was already on her way down, carving through the snow, unaware of the white wall racing toward her. There was no time. The avalanche swallowed her. Adam and Kevin raced into rescue mode, panic surging beneath their training. They scanned the path, their beacons pulsing as they searched for Laura's signal. The snow was deep, nearly 4 meters of it, and heavy as concrete. Every dig was a battle. Every second felt stolen. After 45 agonizing minutes, they reached her, buried, cold, unresponsive. Kevin started CPR. They wrapped her in everything they had, layers of clothing, a bivy sack, and waited for the rescue chopper, hoping against all odds. At 1:30 p.m., the Parks Canada helicopter finally arrived. Laura was airlifted to Foothills Medical Center in Calgary. Her heartbeat was faint, her body dangerously cold. But even after hours of effort, she never woke up. Laura died the next day, her body succumbing to the internal injuries caused by the force of the snow. The shock rippled through the community. Her mother, flying home from Colombia, had no idea what had happened. When the plane touched down, Adam had to connect her with Laura for a final goodbye. But even as time passed, the questions wouldn't let go. How could this have happened? With such experience, such planning, such care. Adam later reflected on the specific slope, how wind-loaded snow, terrain traps, and subtle changes in conditions made it more unstable than they had anticipated. Laura hadn't worn a helmet that day. It wasn't required, and it wasn't something she usually skipped. But in hindsight, Adam couldn't stop asking himself, would it have made a difference? There are no clean answers in the mountains. The line between adventure and tragedy is razor thin. October 1st, 1995, was no ordinary day at Niagara Falls. Tourists were doing their usual oohs and ahs at the thundering Horseshoe Falls, snapping photos and trying not to drop their cameras in the spray. But amidst the fanny packs and rain ponchos, one guy stood out like a flamingo in a flock of pigeons: Robert Overhacker. This 39-year-old daredevil from Camarillo, California, was about to attempt the ultimate "look, Mom, no hands" stunt, not for fame, but to raise awareness about homelessness. His ride of choice, a jet ski, his parachute rocket-propelled, his nerves apparently made of steel. Robert wasn't just winging it. He'd graduated from stunt school. Yes, that's a real thing, and had been cooking up this plan for 7 years. Friends had talked him out of it before, but this time, he was locked in. No backing out. His jet ski proudly displayed a sign that read, "Save the Homeless," turning his high-octane mission into a message. At precisely 12:35 p.m., Robert revved up his jet ski near the Canadian Niagara power plant. Clad in a wetsuit and rocking a custom parachute backpack, he zipped through the water with the confidence of a man who's watched a lot of action movies. His stepbrother and a close friend were in the crowd, cameras ready, hearts probably pounding. As he approached the edge of the massive waterfall, the crowd held its breath. Robert kept his cool, riding the wild current like a pro. Then, boom! He launched himself off the jet ski right at the brink of the 51-meter drop, triggering the rocket that was supposed to unleash his parachute. At first, it looked like it was working. Cheers, hope, maybe even applause. But then, disaster struck. The parachute separated from Robert's body instead of opening. Not ideal. Instead of a graceful glide to safety, Robert plummeted straight down into the churning chaos below. Cue chaos. The Maid of the Mist tour boat was nearby, and its crew sprang into action. At first, Some folks thought they saw him swimming, but sadly, that hope was short-lived. His body was pulled from the water and brought ashore. Despite immediate help and a desperate rush to Greater Niagara General Hospital, Robert was declared dead an hour later. The impact had caused fatal injuries. Word of the tragedy spread faster than a tourist losing their hat in the wind. Some witnesses, still in shock, shared chilling accounts, like the person watching from a hotel balcony who thought Robert had nailed it, only to watch the scene unravel in horror. The footage of the failed stunt made the rounds, sparking debates on safety, risk, and what exactly went wrong. As it turned out, Robert hadn't packed the parachute himself. For a stunt that took 7 years to plan, that detail was a devastating oversight. His wife, Lori Overhacker, was left mourning not just the love of her life, but the weight of a dream that ended in tragedy. The couple had no children, and Lori now had to face a future shaped by one split-second malfunction. Robert's daring leap made him the 15th person since 1901 to intentionally go over Niagara Falls using some kind of contraption. Authorities weren't amused. Canada upped its fines for stunts like these to $10,000, while the U.S. took it even further, with penalties soaring to $225,000. Still, the falls keep luring daredevils like a moth to a very loud, very wet flame. Robert's story, while heartbreaking, reminds us that even the boldest acts, especially the ones with good intentions, carry enormous risk. And when Mother Nature's involved, she doesn't care how noble your cause is. Better triple-check that parachute. It was July 9th, 2024, in Romania, a country celebrated for its stunning landscapes and one of the largest populations of brown bears in Europe. Maria Anna, a 19-year-old hiker, decided to explore the Bucegi Mountains with her boyfriend. What started as a day of adventure soon turned into a heartbreaking tragedy. Maria was a passionate hiker who loved being outdoors. That morning, she and her boyfriend set out to hike the Jeme Trail, a well-known but challenging route near Valas Pumasa, a peaceful waterfall nestled in the mountains. Both were well prepared and excited for the journey, completely unaware of the danger that lay ahead. Out of the dense underbrush, a large brown bear appeared, blocking their path. At first, they froze. Brown bears, even in Romania, typically avoid humans unless threatened or defending cubs. But this one didn't back away. It didn't hesitate. It charged. Her boyfriend, whose name hasn't been made public, did what he could, shouting, waving, trying to scare the bear off with noise. But the bear wasn't retreating. Panic took over. Maria shakily called Romanian emergency services, trying to describe what was happening while her boyfriend shouted in the background for someone, anyone, to help. The dispatcher stayed on the line as the bear came closer. Then, chaos. The bear lunged at Maria, grabbing her leg with its teeth and dragging her from the path. It dragged Maria into the thick vegetation, pulling her further and further from view, toward the edge of a 400-foot cliff. Screams echoed through the canyon. Maria was fighting, trying to resist, but there was only so much she could do. Witnesses later speculated that in the struggle, she may have slipped, or perhaps the bear's weight pushed her over the edge. The call with emergency dispatchers cut off suddenly. Down below, the cliff dropped into a ravine nearly 120 meters deep. Rescuers from Salvamont Prahova rushed to the area, navigating treacherous terrain, knowing they were racing against time. But by the time they reached the bottom, the scene was grim. Maria's body was there, lifeless. The bear was still nearby, guarding the area with a disturbing level of aggression. The rescue team had no choice. To safely recover her, they were forced to fatally shoot the animal. Maria had not survived the fall. Her injuries were catastrophic. Dan Banu, head of the local mountain rescue team, called it one of the most haunting cases his team had ever encountered. Her boyfriend was physically unharmed, but the emotional scars will likely never heal. He had done everything he could, and yet it wasn't enough. He later said he wished he could have taken her place. Wildlife experts offered chilling theories. Some believed the bear might have been sick. Rabies was a possibility. Others suggested that Romania's record-breaking summer heat had pushed the animal to the edge, stressing its body and behavior. Between 2016 and 2021, there were 14 deaths and 158 injuries caused by bear attacks in Romania. Romanian authorities have tried to address the issue. Aggressive bears are relocated or, in some cases, euthanized, but many say that's not enough. Maria Diana's story is more than a tragedy. It's a warning, a reminder that nature, for all its beauty, is still wild.